Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. Today on StrategyCast, we are diving into the world of PR and marketing with Emily Allen, Head of Communications at the rapidly growing tech startup Fluid Truck. Transitioning from journalism to corporate communications, Emily brings a unique perspective on crafting newsworthy narratives and leveraging data to capture media attention. Today, Emily will share strategies to make your brand stand out, prioritize internal communications, and create a culture that embraces risk and innovation. Join us as we explore the tactics that helped Fluid Truck zoom up as the 9th fastest growing company in North America. And don't forget to check out the most recent issue of the StrategyCast newsletter on StrategyCast.com. Just like this episode is full of inspiration and a ton of ideas that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to StrategyCast. I am so excited to have Emily Allen join the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm excited to be here.
I tell you, I am totally stoked to have you on the show today. You are the head of communications and marketing at Fluid Truck. You've got an incredible PR background, which we're really going to dive into today. Before we get there, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like I said, my name's Emily Allen. I am head of communications and marketing at Fluid Truck. Fluid Truck is a brand in which we have enabled tech for truck rentals. So basically what that means is you can hop on your phone and rent a commercial truck at the tap of a button. We're in 400 cities across the US, and it's been a really exciting company to work at because we have been growing like crazy. In fact, in 2022, we were named the 9th fastest growing company in North America by Deloitte based on our revenue numbers. And this has been kind of a unique thing for me to experience because my background has been in journalism. This move to Fluid Truck was actually my first time switching over into corporate communications. And so I come, as you mentioned, with like a heavy PR background based on my journalism experience. But I've had the opportunity now here at Fluid Truck to be a part of its crazy growth story, build the first communications team, and now oversee the marketing team as well. And so it's been a wild ride and really fun.
Well, and it's only going to get wilder, if that's a word, because there's so many exciting things happening within the organization. For the CEOs and early middle stage founders and entrepreneurs listening today, what is it that intrigued you about wanting to leave journalism and go to a startup or, little later stage startup, but nonetheless?
Journalism is fantastic. It's also very challenging. I mean, a lot of journalists out there, what you don't see behind the scenes is that they're waking up at 3 a.m. or they're working every holiday and never spending time with their families. And it ultimately made me decide, how do I really want to prioritize my time? And as I got older, I realized that I could find really exciting opportunities that were in the corporate communication space where you still had, the same fast-paced, deadline-driven environment that I had come to love in journalism, but you're not waking up at 3 a.m. And so that's what ultimately led me to make the switch. It took a long time for me to identify what sector I wanted to be in, but I ultimately decided that tech was the right space for me because this is more of the environment that you're in where it is really fast paced. There's lots of opportunities for innovation and to try new things. And I don't know that you always get that in other sectors, or they can be slow to adapt or try something new. And so I was excited to switch over into tech because I felt like I could get all of these cool experiences that maybe I wouldn't be able to get elsewhere.
Well, you certainly have. There's no doubt about that. I mean, for those of you who are following Fluid Truck, there's a lot of excitement happening in the organization. And, I'd like to believe, Emily, that you are, right there at the helm of making it happen. What we're going to dive into next is really the PR strategies that are needed for those early middle stage companies to really be able to make an impact with the multitude of audiences that they have. And a lot of that starts with building your internal team.
Mhm. Yeah, that was interesting, and probably one of the things I'm most proud of here at Fluid Truck is building out the communications team. When I started, I was corporate communications manager living within the marketing department. And then as things started to shift, it was clear that we really needed a bigger communication strategy and a team to support that. And so I was tasked with building out the inaugural team. And one thing that is interesting when you're in an early stage or a mid-stage startup is the analogy of really building the plane as you fly really applies because oftentimes, your employee base is scaling and growing and you're just trying to keep up. And so that one example of that for me was identifying our internal communications needs. I was originally thinking we are going to be putting a lot more focus on our external communications. As I was building out the team, I thought, okay, on my hiring roadmap, first I'm going to bring in a PR manager, and then I'm going to shift over into internal communications and build that out. And what we found was that our employee base was having a hard time really conceptualizing what our overall plan and our goals were as a company. And it was clear that we had an internal communications issue when there wasn't that information flowing from the top down and then also from, the employee base up. And so had to reshift and instead focus first on our internal communications needs and really hired a wonderful person who came in to oversee that and then built out that internal communication strategy before shifting over to PR.
Yeah. Let's unpack this a little bit because there's so many great tidbits in there. So I love the fact that you bring up that you are, flying the plane as things are constantly changing. And that is such the entrepreneurial and quite frankly, the founder mentality. How do you build a team that can adapt to change? Because all too often we go into our office, we've got the 10 things that we want to get done. And you and I know that we don't even start on number one until 11 o'clock in the morning because of, everything that has been thrown at us. But instilling that or interviewing for that kind of a mindset, which is the excitement of of the DNA of so many fast growth companies as well, can be difficult.
Exactly. I think, it starts obviously in the hiring process. And so making sure that you hire people who have like a can do attitude, that they're willing to roll up their sleeves and dig in, especially in startups. You end up wearing a lot more hats. There's not just strict lanes. The lanes are kind of blurred and people are doing all kinds of different things. And so I really put a heavy emphasis on people's soft skills when I'm bringing them in. For example, the woman that I hired as our internal communications manager, she came from a journalism background as well. And so on paper, sometimes it's hard to see how much journalism experience really applies in the corporate communications world. But when you're looking at like the soft skills of like effective communication and management and like being able to pivot on a dime and stuff, those are skills I really value and make sure that each member of my team has. And so when you start with that foundation, that it's a lot easier to work with them in an ever-changing environment where, as you mentioned, like priorities are changing and things are shifting because they are really adaptable.
I think the internal communications piece is so vital as well. And in fact, a lot of companies probably need to start with that. And it is a total afterthought to no fault of their own. They get so excited about pushing out the product, the market, the solution, whatever it might be, understand that. But that internal alignment is absolutely key. And we would, I guess, with the over 1,000 companies that we've worked with that are early stage over the last 40, almost 45 years, I was not there for 45 years, but I was there for a lot of it. I would say internal comms is the missing piece for all of their collective success.
Yeah, 100%. And one of my mentors told me once that your employee base is your most important stakeholder. And so when you shift your mindset and you think of it that way, that really your employee base is the number one most important audience, more important than even your customers, your investors, journalists, and you think of them as the number one, it's really helpful because it just helps you shift how you prioritize your communication, always making sure that your employee base is the first to know about something. So even if we only have, a 30-minute heads up before we're going to go live with a big award, just to let our employees know that they were the first to know about something. It's really important, not only from like a morale perspective, but just so that they feel as well like they are, the absolute number one person here, and that what they're doing has a real impact on the company and that you see that.
Yeah, I love that. The final thought regarding this front end section of our chat today, how do you determine when and if you end up outsourcing, a lot of the work that you might need outside of the internal staff strength, whether to, a contractor or another agency?
In terms of internal communications?
Well, all communications.
Oh, yeah. For us, I ended up bringing in as my PR hire, an external consultant, because when I weighed, what the market comps were and the expertise that we needed, it made more sense for me to bring in a consultant. And I think from a PR perspective, that is really effective. I mean, it's great when you can have all of that in-house, but also when you work with consultants or agencies where you can really work hand in hand and they have a lot of expertise and knowledge that they can bring to your company. I think that's highly valuable. It would be challenging, I think, to work with, say, like a consultant to do internal communications work, because that
totally agree. Yeah.
really needs to be in on every meeting and just hearing all the day-to-day that's going on. But we've had really great luck with working with an outside PR consultant who helped us really start that steady drumbeat of coverage and helped us get to the next level from where we were just having random, ad hoc announcements to more of a steady flow of coverage. And so, it's a huge testament to her and the work she's done for our team.
I think it's so important. And the thing about outsourcing, a lot of the different services when it comes to the communications is it's their job, obviously, to make you look good. It's their job to help you just dive into the expertise that you might be a little bit too close to because you're working on it day in and day out. And that outside perspective, I think, really lends a lot of strength to a great internal team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep,
I love
I
that.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So one thing that we talked about in our pre-show interview, I think this is when I was like, man, she's just a really cool chick, was this environment. And obviously it starts, from the top down, but this environment of freedom to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And fail is a really strong word, but there's so much that we don't know in the startup environment. And we're writing the plans as we've established along the way. So in order to look at that and know that, okay, that didn't work, let's move on to the next, is a really, really important part of the DNA of the organization.
Mm-hmm. It is. And that's something that is probably just inherent to who I am. I'm a very action-oriented person. And I'd also say the same of my team, is that we're always quick to try to jump in and make a decision and try something out. And that's what I've loved about Fluid Truck. And I think it's a really healthy environment. If you can bring that, maybe it's not company-wide, but you can just bring that at least to your team, is this freedom to fail environment. And it's not to say that we're just out there, trying things willy-nilly and not really putting a lot of thought into it. We do. It's just a balance between making a really great informed decision, but not finding yourself in analysis paralysis where you're, trying to decide if this is absolutely the perfect decision and it takes you several months to pull the trigger. So, for us, an example of that on the marketing side was programmatic marketing. I know, a lot of people are in the programmatic marketing space at this point. But for us, we could have spent a long time trying to figure out exactly if this was going to be the right solution for us to reach our customer base. And instead, we did research, we looked at the data from what the companies were presenting us and the opportunities, and then we just dove in and gave it a shot. And I think an important part of that too is making sure that you set up the correct metrics on the front end so that you can measure if it is success. And so we're very metrics driven at my company. And so really making sure that we're seeing the conversions, the return on ad spend to make sure that it makes sense. But again, knowing that if it didn't, well then, we gave it a shot, we moved on. And now next time, if we have a tighter budget and we have to be very thoughtful about how we spend our money, we know, okay, it wasn't our best option to try programmatic. We're going to focus instead on this avenue because this is a sure way for us to, make money and get conversions.
There's so many pieces of that too with just one media type, right? Is it the messaging?
Mhm.
Is it the imagery? Is it, the day parting that you could deploy? Obviously, is it the right audience or the wrong audience? And having those, as you've stated, all those key metrics up front to be able to measure and bob and weave and A/B test and, so on and so forth is what really helps determine, okay, we gave it our all, we've got to push it aside, or let's fine tune this piece of it and then move forward. And even seasonality, by market. I'm sure it are things that you have to consider day in and day out when it comes to, that sort of an approach.
Yeah.
How did it work for you?
It's worked really well. I'd also say too, from a management perspective, at one point I've had about 9 people on both my teams. And what I found was when you are really in the weeds with them on trying to make every decision, it's just not sustainable as a manager. And so having this freedom to fail environment is great because it gives people the courage to go out and be more autonomous and just make decisions on their own, knowing that if things don't go as we want, they're not going to be, their job's not going to be in jeopardy. They just feel a lot more confidence. And so I also think it's a great thing to just a great mindset for your team so that it frees up more time as a manager so you can focus on like the bigger strategy instead of being in the weeds with everyone, and then gives your team more opportunity to really develop that skill of decision making and going out on their own and really owning a project.
I think that's fabulous. So we really dove into building the team and then building a culture that the team can succeed in. And now we're going to roll up our sleeves and really dive into one of the toughest things, I think, from a PR standpoint is the pitch, especially with unknown commodities that seemingly have no interest. How do you approach that situation?
Mhm. Yeah, that was a great thing for me to bring from my journalism background into the communication space is just what is newsworthy. I think when you go to a company and people are very passionate about what they're doing and what their product is, they feel like anything they're doing is newsworthy. But when you come from my perspective as a reporter, I would get maybe at least 100 pitches in my inbox a day. And so, it's a bunch of companies thinking what they're doing is newsworthy, but clearly like there's just not enough time in the day to give all of those companies coverage. So I think coming at it from the lens of, what are things related to your product or event or something that has a broader impact on the general community at large, can be a great way to start to hone in on how you could craft your pitch. One thing I'm a huge fan of is data. And, I feel like you hear a lot of people in the communication space talking about that at this point, but what data do you have access to within your company that you could put together a really interesting report on that you could share out to journalists? That was always an easy win for me. Whenever I got those reports, for example, I think a lot of like Zillow and some of the bigger companies do a great job of putting out reports on like the average median rent in their area. And, people are moving more to these cities. Journalists just gobble that stuff up. And so if you can find interesting data within what you're collecting as a company and then pitch that out to journalists, I think you'll have a lot of success.
How did you determine the right go-to market approach regarding, what is national, what might be more product, what might be culture, thought leadership? Break down, if you would, some of the pieces of that process or that mindset in developing that strategy.
hmm I think, we all love the idea of landing our companies in top tier publications. But, that takes a lot of work and you have to have the absolute perfect pitch at the right time in order to land that. Also, obviously, developing relationships with journalists is huge, but it can be more challenging in these top tier publications. And so, what we found instead is that we have a lot of success when we are targeting more niche publications where we know that our audience lives.
Right.
An example of this is a product that we had launched called Fluid Renew, and we had a great rapport going with a fleet publication. And so we were able to just directly pitch them on this product. We got placement in their newspaper. Freight Waves is the publication, and it ended up being a great success for us. We got great coverage, a lot of eyes on that story, and it was more focused on our target audience. And so I think it's always, if you feel like you have a pitch that's worthy of national attention, you should for sure go for it, but don't feel like you're losing if you end up getting placement in more of a niche publication, because that could end up being better for your business.
I think it really does build into that, which ties into local as well. A lot of times when we're pitching like a Denver Business Journal or a Dallas Times or something like that, local can build to national. And with some of the business journals, they'll pick those up, from one market to the next, and there you go, just like that. And I think that a lot of people lose sight of regarding even the investment communities. We launched a product about a year and a half ago, and they were like, we don't want any local coverage, no local coverage. Well, seemingly you still end up with some local coverage because you can't say no when a reporter calls and says, we are not the sort of agency that's going to say no to that. Well, guess what? That local coverage in the Denver Post ended up garnering the largest investment to date because they read that local story. And so I think a lot of times it's not just about the publicity that's achieved or the story or the number of impressions, but what is the alternative effect, the positive effect? And in this situation, we said, okay, local is going to be important. They heard us, they agreed after a while. And then guess what? What came of it? It wasn't necessarily the story that hit, again, great, but the outcome of it was bigger than they ever could have imagined.
Mhm. Exactly. And I think too, it all goes back towards building credibility for your brand. And especially for early and mid-stage startups, whenever, you're doing that and building up credibility and people are searching Fluid Truck and they're seeing all of these positive articles in the Denver Business Journal or the Denver Post, it does a lot in terms of building your brand credibility and even helping with recruitment for your employee base. And so I definitely think that it's worth your time, and it's a great thing when you can get that kind of coverage.
Yeah. So a pitch story that could have gone a lot better that I'm going to share with everyone right now. We had a media tour that we were at in New York, and we had built a semi-trailer. And inside this semi-trailer were a bunch of different ways. The product was a safety product. And there are a bunch of different ways that you could interact with some imagery and words and audio and determine whether or not you were in a safe environment, and then utilize this product to create more safety. And we were pitching, had reporters in and out of the trailer for 2 days. And we were pitching the Today Show to bring the trailer, the semi-trailer, over to the Day Show and take some of the reporters, the morning team, through it. And in the final pitch at 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. that morning, the producer finally said to me, "This sounds too promotional." And it has haunted me for the last 20 years because we were so close. But this is an area that I think even the most steadfast PR professionals can lose sight of here and there is the promotional side of really creating something that's newsworthy.
Mhm. I know, it's so true, and it's really hard because you want to get in your messaging and you want to see your brand positioned a certain way, and you may want to get all 5 things that you really want them to cover into that, and as you're pushing that, it starts to feel more and more promotional, and you get further and further away from what journalists are looking for, which is really, how does this impact their audience and why does that matter to them? And so I think it's something that you always have to weigh. I mean, if you can go into an interview and maybe you have 2 goals of talking points that you really want your executive to hit on, and that gets done, or they get even one of those in, that's great. But yeah, I think when you try to really shape the entire story yourself and have full control of it, journalists hate that. They're just gonna start backing away slowly, slowly, and then all of a
Right.
sudden you find yourself out of a story.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other area that I think a lot of PR professionals, quite frankly, get lazy with is with the pitch, the the email, the voicemail, the text based on the relationship you have with them sounds too plain Jane. It's too regimented. It's too scripted. And there's no personalization with the pitch. There's no reason why this would be great for you to do a follow-on story with, a story that you ran a year ago, or, this is going to transform the industry. Here's how it really aligns with this story that, so and so recently wrote. So they're not the PR teams, and this happens, I think, more with a lot of companies that don't have a strong internal comms team yet. They think that they can do it on their own, and they ask their assistant to do it. But it's just not the right approach when it comes to getting, even sparking interest, let alone a yes.
Mhm. Exactly. Well, and I think, in the dream scenario, if you can create a very customized pitch for a select number of journalists, that's going to be huge. That said, if there's times where you've got a great report and you want to send that out to people in every market, sometimes it can be really hard to tailor that individual pitch. But one thing that I always found in our newsroom, which was really frustrating for all of us, is someone would just copy and paste all of the emails
Oh,
from every journalist in the newsroom and just send us the same pitch over and over again, but just adapting the name like, hey, Drew, hey, Megan, hey, Emily. And what people don't realize oftentimes is a lot of those emails, they go to the entire newsroom. So we could see everyone getting these emails over and over again, and we would just immediately
oh,
delete and move on. And so even if you're sending out more of like a mass pitch, definitely do not do that approach because it just doesn't work on anyone. But I think when you can really take the time and find journalists who are covering similar topics to yours, and you can say, hey, I saw that you did this article. I want you to know about what we're working on over here, which could be a great follow up, or, it's this unique angle that maybe I haven't seen you cover before. That is really effective. I know that's something that our PR consultant has done so well with, is just really building relationships with people on the front end and being very thoughtful about when we reach out and who we reach out to and what we're pitching to them based on what they cover. And that's been our best way of getting coverage.
because what happens when you've got those relationships is they reach out to you as a subject matter expert. And isn't that the holy grail of PR, is when they actually are utilizing you as a resource?
Exactly. And from my perspective, when I was a journalist and we had these subject matter experts, there's not always, it's not necessarily really hard to become that person. What you really need to be is just easily accessible and willing to talk about various topics that, might not be perfectly within your wheelhouse, but are still, you have enough expertise in it that you can jump in. And that those people ended up becoming our go-tos for subject matter experts. And there wasn't any secret sauce. It was just when we called them on a Saturday, they were available for a 30-minute interview about, a topic that's kind of adjacent to what they do now. And so I think whenever you can be really collaborative with journalists and make sure that you're available, make it easy for them, that is the fastest way to work your way into a subject matter expert for them.
I love that. That's great. We're going to talk about some AI tools in a minute, but I want to stay on a really important topic, which is why a lot of PR just in general fails for companies. And I think it's really important because we've all been there. And I want to share there was a great Forbes article that I recently read, and it talked about the reasons, top 10 reasons why PR fails. And I just want to go through each one of these real quickly with you and get your immediate feedback. So the first one is you publish a press release without knowing what the release really is. So there's no reason.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that that would even happen, but I mean, yeah, really honing in on your pitch and why it matters to people is important. And so, especially too, I mean, posting on the newswire and stuff like that's not cheap. And so you want to make sure that when you're putting that out there, that it's going to be effective. And so figuring out why you're pitching this and how it impacts people is a really important place to start.
And back to your first point, is it newsworthy?
Mhm.
Yeah. Starting a PR campaign too late. This happens left and right.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think as soon as you can jump in and start contributing to the narrative and hopefully getting ahead of it. And so you're making sure that, your messaging and your position is getting out there is super important. And so if you haven't gone through crisis communication training or anything, this is kind of the starting blocks of that is just making sure that you get out there early. And that also translates to just softer PR as well, making sure that you're out there and controlling the message and how you're positioning your brand.
Yeah. This is probably near and dear to both of our hearts. Asking what PR can do for you, not what you can do for PR.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that, as I mentioned before, really making sure that you're finding topics or, data within your company that has an impact on people or that journalists perceive as having an impact or of interest to the greater community.
It's not as self-serving. We see
Yeah.
that a lot as well. Not having defined key messages, just, a spray and pray approach with putting so much information out that there's no focal point for someone to really care about.
Yeah, that's very important. I think making sure that you have a very succinct and tailored message is huge. I mean, people will only give your pitch maybe a couple of seconds before they move on. And so making sure that you're very direct and to the point and making sure that in that first sentence or two, you're really conveying the crux of what you're trying to get across is really important.
Isn't that all marketing? Like we have, 3 seconds to get someone to stop for a digital ad, 6 seconds on the trade show floor. I mean, it's got to be intriguing and interesting. Number 5 here is not budgeting for PR.
Mhm.
And typically that turns into we've got a crisis, and or just not looking at it as an integral part of your integrated approach.
Exactly. And I think too, there's a lot of, for example, we apply to a lot of awards, and that can be a really great way to boost your brand and build credibility. And it's important to have a budget for that because it goes a long way. For example, Fluid Truck was just named by Fast Company as one of the world's most innovative companies, which is awesome. And that goes a long way to building credibility with our investors. We've gotten great coverage from Fast Company because of that award. We've had at least 3 articles now from them. Really energizes our employee base. But if you're not budgeting for that on the front end of the year, for all the different things, you're going to miss out on those opportunities.
Yeah, and you and I both agree with this next one on such a big level, but not getting expert advice along the way.
Mhm. Exactly. And, for me, as I've talked about, coming from journalism in here, it was really important to build up a base of mentors to help me as I've been building our strategy and as we've had to pivot and just kind of getting insight from people. And so I think when you are in a role, especially a leadership role in communications, for as much as you can be learning from other people, setting up networking with and creating a mentor base is
Right.
huge, just for your overall career growth, but then also for making sure that you have really buttoned up an effective strategy. For me, I report to our CEO, and he's very in tune with what we're doing from a communications and marketing perspective, but he's not going to always give me the real feedback on what my communication strategy is. And so I seek that from outside mentors to just help me.
Yeah, that's great. Targeting the wrong media. Again, this approach that the Wall Street Journal should be the first publication that you pitch because you're good enough and you're innovative enough. That's like everyone's pipe dream, and it takes a while to get there.
It does, yeah, and some of that too. Like we had a interview with a Wall Street Journal reporter, and it was more of just an introductory interview. And we have yet, unfortunately, to see kind of the fruits of that play out in an actual publication. But it is nice to at least sometimes have those introductory conversations. But that being said, we worked really hard to get that, and still we haven't seen it. So when you can work more with maybe niche publications, as we talked about before, that are more focused on your target audience, or some great wins within local or regional publications, that goes a long way in terms of boosting brand awareness for you.
One thing that we see a lot is that there's a misguided mindset about how PR should be tracked and measured. And a lot of times we think about the efficiency of it, like that could be an EMV, but really, what is the effectiveness? So did it drive interest on your website? Did you see a spike in visitors to a website? Did you have more phone calls that day? Those sort of things people just don't think about.
And this is an ongoing discussion that we're constantly having here within my teams. And I think just as a larger communications and marketing industry as a whole, it can be easy, from the marketing perspective, when you're looking at conversions, that is a really easy way to see how you're driving revenue. But when you're, putting out great content or PR placement that's not necessarily driving conversions, that can be hard to quantify from a revenue perspective, but we all know it's really important. An example of this is we had an article in the Denver Post. We were one of the first companies to unveil rentable Ford Lightnings. And so we had a great article, and I wanted to just do a deep dive into how many conversions we saw from that. And we had seen huge traffic on our website that day. And I was surprised to see that we ultimately only had a handful of conversions. But then again, it's not surprising, because when someone is reading an article in the Denver Post or they're scrolling through LinkedIn, they're not necessarily thinking in that moment, oh, I'm going to click on this link and book a rental truck.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's important for us to just be constantly in front of these people so that next time they are thinking about renting a truck, then we're top of mind. And so, it's always hard to quantify that. But I think as much as you can to just prove your worth to your company and to continue to get more resources, it's really important to try to hone in on all the ways you can find your PR being effective.
And you captivated the audience, which is a huge win. Whether they have a need 30 days downstream or a year downstream, you'll be able to maintain that top of mind awareness with them, with, backing up, additional programmatic and PR strategies out there. This seems so basic, and you live and breathe this from the newsroom, I'm certain, but failing to follow up with media and the coverage you secured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge one. I mean, first of all, you just want to make sure that they, on the front end, once you do that interview, making sure that they have everything that they need. But then afterwards, if you have interesting follow-up stories, maybe new developments, they're a great person to go back to and pitch, because if you are already able to get them to do the first story, especially if it landed pretty well, the chances are you can get them to do a second follow-up story. And so they should be the first people that you go back to.
Yeah. Not planning for the long game, something that everyone with PR or communications behind their title lives and breathes day in and day out. It's not immediate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's planning for the long game, and it's also planning a more robust outlook. And so that's one thing I appreciate about running both our communications and marketing teams is really seeing the full picture. So as you're building out your PR pitch, or you're doing a product launch, how are you thinking about it from like an internal perspective? What are you going to communicate to your investors? How are you going to support that with your digital marketing? Is there email marketing as well that you should be deploying to support that? And so I think, it's about thinking about the long game, but then also thinking about the holistic picture as you're building out your PR campaign.
I don't know if you've thought about any, areas that PR fails along the way, but as we were talking through this, I thought of one more. So number 11 that I want to add to the table, that is taking the data and not fact checking it in a big way as a comms team with the internal team or an outside comms team with an internal team. A couple of years ago, we had a worldwide pitch for a product and had all the third-party validation secured. And the brand took out the source of that third-party validation very, very last minute. It was a red flag for us, but it turned out to be even a worse situation because we believe that we probably released information that was not factual.
Mhm.
And that is never a good situation.
No, it's not. And I think, you know, maybe you may initially, if a reporter ends up covering that, but then it comes out later that that information was incorrect. I mean, you've basically just blown up that relationship with that reporter or with any of the media that covered it. Also reputationally, that's
Patient
you
management. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky that I haven't had to deal with that because, we collect all of our own data and we oversee it, and then we work with our PR consultant on pitching that out. But I think it's extremely vital. You might think that you're getting some sort of quick win from, getting a story published that makes you look and your product look really good, but eventually when that comes out that that's not correct, then you are, 100 steps behind and you're pretty much never going to be able to work with that
Yeah.
reporter or maybe even news outlet again.
Or if you fire the client and
Mhm.
then have a very, very good conversation with the reporter, there's, definitely some redemption
Yeah.
that can take place. But it is something that I think is a very, very serious situation out there today when it comes to data. And we're pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get the news out, but it's got to be, we've got to fact check just like a reporter would,
Mhm.
period.
Exactly.
Okay, as we're closing our conversation up here, let's talk a little bit about AI, something that's really near and dear to both of our hearts. We are utilizing it quite a bit internally, but it can also, using it right is the key. How are you enticing your team surrounding the use of AI, and what are some best practices?
Mhm. Yeah, for us, when we started off 2024, my big goal was to have my team be a lot more comfortable with AI. I think it's important not only here, but also for the rest of their careers, just making sure that they feel very proficient with AI. We use ChatGPT here at our office. And, I think when it first came out, there was some shame in admitting, oh, I used this draft to ChatGPT helped me write this first draft or something. For me, from my perspective, as we are continuously being asked to do more and more with less and less, utilizing ChatGPT can be a really helpful way for us to continue to meet the needs of our company with more limited resources. And so I'm always encouraging my team to, how can they really hone their prompts to get a great first draft going of something and then, take their expertise as humans and really rework it to make sure that it is authentic to us and our brand voice and just more authentically human. And an example of this is we have been going through like a big email marketing overhaul and writing out a lot of marketing or email marketing campaigns. And we're using ChatGPT to help us put together that first draft and then, iterating on it ourselves. And what that does then is it frees up more time for us to dig into like the triggers and our segmentation and build out more campaigns that just wouldn't be feasible in the timeline that we're doing it with the staff that we have. So I think that embracing it and figuring out ways that it can really be your co-pilot is a great way to utilize ChatGPT without just solely utilizing it for absolutely everything, but using it as an effective starting point, as in a way as well to be more efficient with your time.
Yeah, and then you add the wisdom in, and you've got a great product in the end.
Mhm.
I think it's great. You are providing all sorts of wisdom today as well. So we thank you so much for your information share. So many incredible insights. What are some final thoughts that you have for our audience today as they're building out their PR programs?
Yeah, I think as much as you can, building out this freedom to fail environment within your teams and encouraging them to be autonomous and to make decisions on their own is going to be a huge win for you in the long run. I think making sure that you're curating your pitch and, if you're utilizing ChatGPT, making sure that you still take that then and like bring in the human element of that is huge as well. And also, just as much as you can, think of it more holistically, thinking about your internal teams and what their needs are before you're going out and communicating something publicly.
That's great. Emily, what is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
I'd say LinkedIn is the best. So Emily Allen on LinkedIn. So I love to connect with you. And yeah, I'd say that's the best way to get in touch these days.
Well, and you guys can get in touch with me by emailing me at Lori@StrategyCast.com. And don't forget to sign up for the StrategyCast newsletter at StrategyCast.com as well. Emily Allen, thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thanks, Lori.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.